As we begin with this 15-minute meditation, take a few moments to first settle into your bodies. Settling doesn't necessarily mean that we immediately relax into the body. Relaxation may be a byproduct as we settle. But in the sense of settling, we take a few moments to notice what we are working with physically and mentally. So as you settle into your body, notice if the body needs any attention in this present moment. Shoulders, hips, back, and legs, just the common areas that may make some noise in the midst of a meditation practice. If the body feels settled, that's great. But we don't have to rush it. It may just take a few minutes for all of that to happen. When it comes to us settling into our minds, the simplest thing that we can do is bring awareness to anything that is trying to take your mind's attention away from the body, away from the present moment. And for most of us, there may not be anything particular. It could just be an abundance of noise. A busy morning, busy afternoon planned ahead. Random thoughts come and go, and that's okay. What we learn to do within our practice of meditation is to clear the mind to begin observing our breath. So start very simply. Notice the breath as it enters and exits through your nostrils. Bringing your mind's attention to this area around your nose. Now, when it comes to the practice of our meditation, we don't have to control the breath in any particular way. As time passes, the breath will create its own natural rhythm. But we don't have to force the breath to become any deeper or longer than it naturally is. Only if you start to feel that your mind is becoming a bit dull, a bit drowsy, or distracted, then no problem. Take a few deep and intentional breaths. Once you can reestablish a connection to your inhales and exhales, we just let the breath soften on its own as we create that steady rhythm once again. And as much as we began this meditation by bringing awareness to the nose, take a moment to see if you can feel the breath any lower in the body, somewhere around the chest, somewhere around the belly. Just see if you can feel the breath as it travels deeper into the body. We are still just working with natural breath. So we don't have to add any additional effort to create sensation around the chest or belly. Doesn't matter how subtle the sensation is, how soft it is. Just notice if something can be felt around your chest or belly as you continue to breathe naturally. If it feels natural, can you deepen your breath just a little bit? No force necessary here, but just seeing if the space is there to expand the breath a bit more. Maybe feeling the movement of the diaphragm. Feeling a very gentle sensation of expansion and contraction around your belly. And for the last few minutes of our meditation, can you just let the breath happen on its own? No conscious effort of needing to breathe a certain way. The space has been created. Just feel the breath as it enters and exits. As we come to the end of our meditation, just taking a few moments to softly reconnect to your body. Sounds, the smells, the area around you. Moving your wrists and ankles, your fingers and toes. And as always, if it feels comfortable enough, we can start to create some heat within our hands. And allowing for that heat to wash over your face as you take your time to reopen your eyes. Awesome. Did you notice anything about your breathing today?
When you said to breathe sort of more deeply, I know that they say when you inhale, your belly's supposed to go out. Is that right?
Yeah.
My belly, I think, is stuck in, like, trying to suck it in all the time because, like, after you give birth, your stomach's trying to suck in your stomach. I was trying to just relax it, and it just wouldn't relax. So it was interesting.
That's an interesting observation, yeah. Typically, so when we breathe using muscle, which is diaphragm, the diaphragm pulls downwards. As a result of diaphragm pulling downwards, there is sometimes a natural just expansion of the belly because it's pushing outwards. Not excessively, but just even a little bit. And then as we breathe out, this diaphragm lifts upwards. And what the lowering and lifting does is our lungs are right above the diaphragm. So our diaphragm, it's a very awkward muscle to try to feel. Some of us can. It requires a little bit more manual intervention of running your fingers underneath your rib cage. But our diaphragm muscle is lined underneath our rib cage to separate our abdominal cavity from our thoracic cavity. So when the diaphragm lowers, it stretches the lungs downwards. And when the lungs in this sense get stretched downwards, they fill up that much more. And when the diaphragm lifts, it squeezes on, or it pushes on the lungs to exhale. And as that space closes, we release air out of the body. What the challenge with many of us that don't have awareness around breath, and it's the things that I've spoken about in the past, we breathe shallow. So the diaphragm doesn't even get utilized. It's a muscle that doesn't end up being trained in any meaningful way. So the challenge there is that we constantly take in shallow breaths, and there's just a buildup of what over time we would just consider like stale energy. And because we don't breathe out fully, the lungs never get to free up that space. So the hope when it comes to working with the diaphragm is that we can create more realistic space for breath to enter and exit. That does a host of benefits when it comes to just supplying fresh oxygen into the body, creating a sharper mind, creating a calmer mind, all of these things. But that's an interesting observation because if we are very tense in this area, it does prevent the diaphragm from naturally, softly lowering downwards. I would say so. Could you identify if your breath was shallow or deep? If it was smooth or choppy? If it felt easy to work with that rhythm, or if it took some concerted effort to work with that rhythm?
Definitely had shallow breath at the beginning. So your guidance helped
get down deeper. And then, as you said, you created the space, so then my natural breathing seemed to be deeper too.
That's
But it was shallow, then you gave us some instructions, and then it was deeper.
And to me, that's one of the hopes is when it comes to the actual practice of meditation, we want to be relatively hands-off of the whole process. We play the role of an observer. We are observing the breath as it is. But the challenge with that is that a lot of us don't have any realization of how we're actually breathing in our day-to-day. And that is the breath that carries into the meditation, this shallow, rapid, rough, choppy breath. And so by slowing down the whole process of breathing, by relaxing the muscles surrounding the breath, space gets created. And in that sense, the breath can find that natural rhythm in which there's no real effort in the breath slowing down. There's no real effort in the breath becoming smooth. There's no real effort in breathing. And in that sense, you can take that step back to just let the breath happen. But what I guess the difference here is that when it comes to the formal meditation practice, we don't want to be so engaged in the act of breathing that we don't let the breath happen on its own, that we are so consciously controlling each inhale and exhale coming in. The mindfulness aspect of it would be that when we are then walking around in daily life, where when we move and when we're stimulated by everything, naturally, nervous system becomes a bit more heightened, so breath becomes shallow, becomes faster. That we can notice those things happening in the real world to slow down. So that we can be, in that instance, a bit more mindful with ourselves and our environment to keep that space from it being smothered by all the excitement that is around us, whether it's good excitement, bad excitement, it's just nervous system arousal. Now, why this matters? Sorry. Shallow, rapid breathing is a stress response. It signals stress internally. And so what happens is that when we're sitting to meditate, if our breath is higher up in the chest, if we are unconsciously breathing out of the mouth or breathing in and out of the mouth, if the breath has an unnaturally fast rhythm for something that doesn't require that level of exertion, it puts our nervous system into a state of arousal, a state of reaction. And in that sense, if we're just sitting to meditate, it's very hard to calm down the mind when the nervous system is that wired up. And that is where thoughts come and go, and we may not even want these thoughts coming and going. They're just popping up because the nervous system hasn't settled. Whereas the opposite of that, if we can deepen breath. So I asked a natural progression. We started at the nose. We just observed where in the body that breath could go to. You were then asked to see if, not forcefully, not needing to really be hands-on, if there could be a natural depth found in that breath. And then I brought awareness a little bit lower into the belly to see if the diaphragm can be used, if the belly can be used. And then having created all that space, could we just take a step back? But it did take a long time. We were somewhat engaged with the breath for the first 10 to 12 minutes to create space. And then the last 3 minutes, we were asked to go hands off, to just let the breath happen. So in that sense, those 3 minutes would have been that actual point of mindful meditation, in which the space has been created and we can just observe our breath freely in that space. Which is why I sometimes say, as much as for beginners, 5 minutes may be all that you can find. As we get deeper and deeper into this practice, as we understand just how much we're working with, 10 minutes is just like the warm-up in that sense. in which you're not warming yourself up to do more, but you're warming up in the sense that you're settling into the practice. The body is settling, so we're softening, we're relaxing. The mind is centering, so it's becoming more in tune with this experience inside the body. And the breath is naturally taking up more space. And if all of those things can happen, then all of our attention remains in this inner body experience. And if we can establish that connection, then the meditation practice can really take hold. And what the challenge is with the breath in this case, this whole thing about, the shallow breathing, the rapid breathing, chest breathing, mouth breathing, our body, our nervous system doesn't really know the difference between an actual threat and a perceived threat. But if we don't listen to our breath, we get swept away by this threat. And the threat doesn't exist in that sense. It's just that our nervous system has become so wired up that this has become the default of it. And what we try to do by engaging in slow, deep breathing is that we try to tone our nervous system into a state in which it can naturally be at rest, not reaction. Does that make sense? So I just want to touch upon that diaphragm once again. It is our primary breathing muscle. Breathing organ, your lungs. Your lungs are like the vessel, this would be my lungs, and pouring in the water would be me pulling in the air. But what happens is that it would be like there's something blocked in the middle of my bottle. So although this bottle can hold like 2 liters of liquid, if I have all of this density, this stale energy in here, I can only fill up half of my bottle. So I'm just carrying a heavy bottle, but there's only half the water in it. And what we try to do is empty out the bottle, so exhale as much as we can, get rid of whatever that dead weight is in there, or whatever is blocking that. And by doing so, when we start to engage the diaphragm, we can really pull more air in. And the more awareness we have around our diaphragm as we breathe, the stronger our breathing is. And in that sense, it's just that we start to breathe better. If we can breathe better by being more mindful with the diaphragm, that breath carries into everything that we do. And as is the case with muscles, if we don't use them, they weaken. And the challenge with this one is that for a lot of us, it's perpetually weak because we've never used it to its full capacity. Why the diaphragm matters as well is that it is very closely linked with what would be our vagus nerve. Our vagus nerve is sometimes known as the wandering nerve. I believe outside of the sciatic nerve, it is the longest nerve that is in the upper body. Travels from the brain down towards our gut. And where the diaphragm lines up is just in front of the vagus nerve. So when we're up here and we're just constantly shallow breathing, vagus nerve doesn't get any stimulation. This keeps us in our sympathetic nervous system, in our fight or flight. But when we can slow down our breathing, when we can deepen our breath, especially when we can lengthen the breath out, we can almost add what you could call like a massage-like effect to the nervous system, to the vagus nerve. And in doing so, we are gently sending a signal to the body that it is safe to relax. I mean, I don't need you to do the experiment yourself, but try relaxing as you're hyperventilating. It's just not possible. And it's not to say that we walk around hyperventilating, although at a very low grade, that's almost what it is. But shallow, fast, rapid breathing is almost that same experience of a low-grade hyperventilation. And what we want to do is just simply the opposite of that. If there's a mindful breathing technique that you can practice on your own, less to do with meditation, more about just grounding down. I speak about it quite often in my yoga classes, but it's accentuating your breath out. So if you inhale for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 6. Slight imbalance, yes, but your imbalance is in a positive direction, in which you always can release a little bit more than you take in. And if that doesn't work in the sense of 4 and 6, the number is too out of balance, then 5 and 6 or 4 and 5, whatever it is that works for you. But just that mindset of being able to slow down the breath to stimulate a response within our nervous system that the body is safe to rest, to relax. Why breath is such an important anchor for us when we are sitting to meditate is that it's always available. Even when we turn our back to our breath, which means the mind wanders away. The breath is still there. You are still breathing. You're unconsciously breathing at that point in time. When we face our breath, when we start to work with our breath, when we are muscularly engaged with our breath, we become conscious of breath. And that is the whole act of our meditation practice, of a mindfulness practice, is that there is some semblance of being consciously connected to breath. Just because you're connected and conscious of it doesn't mean that you have to go out and manipulate it. So that detail is there, is that when we are meditating, we are observing a breath that is effortlessly entering and exiting. That we are not opening and closing the door every time the breath is there. The door is just open. Breath comes in, breath goes out. We just are at the door. We see each breath coming in, we see each breath going out. One of the, analogies or examples that was used is, think about like the guards at Buckingham Palace. They're vigilant, they're aware of everything, but they're asked to react to nothing. So you have like the videos of people like walking up to them and, doing their little poses, but they don't move. And it's kind of that same mindset that we want to have with our breath. That we are vigilant in the sense that we are aware of the breath as it enters and exits, but we don't have to have any control over the breath coming and going. That we don't need to react to the breath coming or going. That we don't need to close the door on one breath and open the door to another breath. Door stays open, gate stays open. We're just the guard there. Does that make sense? The challenge naturally is that because the diaphragm is, for many of us, a weakened muscle, one of the hopes would be is that the stronger the diaphragm is in daily life, the more effortless the experience can be to go from shallow breathing to deep breathing without exerting a lot of effort. And then after a certain point in time, the hope would be is that shallow breathing is no longer the natural state, but that deep breathing could be the natural state. In which case, it's a lot seamless, or it's more seamless in the transition to go from daily life into a meditation without having to deal with so much internal conflict of slowing down, deepening, relaxing, calming down, all of these things. And it's not to say that some days aren't going to be harder than others, but if we can understand the art of breathing, that as much as breath is something that unconsciously happens to us, just as your heart unconsciously beats, your digestion systems unconsciously happen. The breath does also unconsciously happen, but the breath is very unique because we can bring conscious attention to it. Does that simple detail make sense? So, one of the ways that in the past I've introduced training diaphragm breathing, I've had people use like 2.5 pound weights, 5 pound weights, placing it on the belly. So you lay down on your back, you place a weight on your belly. If you need your hand on top just so that the weight doesn't move, no problem. And it may take a bit of time to build that strength in the diaphragm. Just like a muscle needs to warm up, diaphragm may also need to warm up. So it's not like your first breath, you're pulling as hard as you can. But try your best to just be aware of the mindful experience of a belly rising and falling with resistance on top, with a 5-pound weight, a 2-pound weight, whatever it is. When you're out in daily life, when we are just taking a mindful walk, because the body is moving, once again, very natural to just go into shallow, rapid breathing. Can you slow down the pace of breath? It's not that you have to move slowly, but can you breathe slowly? Slow breathing doesn't necessarily mean that you take in any less air. When it comes to breathing in, even the shallowest of breaths can provide all the oxygen that we need. Like billions of trillions of molecules of air into your nose. I don't know the exact number, but something like that. But when it comes to breathing out, that is where the strength of the diaphragm comes in. Because our ability to lift the diaphragm helps to clear out more air. Which would mean that with each breath in that comes into the nose, we are able to pull in fresher air. More oxygen comes in, more oxygen gets utilized by the body. In the sense of that happening as well, then we're also able to bring, I believe one of the key things that nasal breathing has is nitric oxide, which is a very helpful reaction that isn't available in the mouth that filters the air. Also, mouth breathing, there's no filter. That's why we have nose hairs. Filters pollutants and dust and all of those tiny things that we don't see, but they are filtered through our nose hair. And especially now, with spring coming around, allergies are abundant for people. And so nasal breathing is just one of those additional filters that we have to create cleaner airways inside of our body. The whole act of mindful breathing is to be aware of your breath in as many different situations as you can. Common situations that you can do so in, driving. Driving, it's very easy to get swept away by traffic, or just to get swept away by the speed that you're moving at. Mindful breathing at least creates that anchor within us that the breath can still remain smooth and steady. When we're having a conversation, I have to note it myself sometimes as well when I get carried on a tangent. Breath just becomes shallow. Rapid breathing, rapid talking. Slow down the breath to slow down the speed of conversation. We don't have to rush through conversations. Most importantly, during moments of stress. Stress enters the body, physical, mental, emotional. Breath is bound to be influenced by that, especially if we are unaware about it. Noticing if the breath is starting to change is a moment of mindfulness. So we can't disregard that initial noticing. But noticing isn't enough. There may be some action that can be undertaken. And in that sense, if you can notice that some form of stress is changing or influencing your breath, that is an opportunity for you to press pause, to slow down, to stop, to reclaim space with your breath. Because what's happening is that the breath that may have had that natural rhythm, deep rhythm, smooth rhythm, is now also being influenced by stress that has entered the room, entered the mind space, entered whatever. And in that sense, your mind goes in two different directions. It's preoccupied with stress, which is speeding things up. And as a result of that, this starts to also speed up. And what we need to do is shift attention back down here. It's not to say that we're ignoring this, whatever is coming up in terms of stress, physical, mental, emotional. But by reclaiming space here, we can more objectively view what's happening here. Or we can have that space to view what is happening with a bit of non-reactivity. Does that make sense? it's once again, like, I think the main thing that we want to understand is that breath is with us 24/7. That's not any wisdom to share. It's straightforward. But learning about how we breathe in one experience to the next experience to the next experience is very meaningful. It's very valuable to us. How we breathe when we're just in our natural environment, day-to-day life, noticing how we breathe when we're in a rush, noticing how we breathe when we're stressed out, noticing how we breathe when we're happy, when we're sad, when we're angry. We don't notice these things. And that's not something to shame ourselves over. It's just that there was never education about this, right? You're not taught in school that when you feel a certain way that your breath becomes a certain way. And what a mindfulness practice is designed to do is to not have our attention get pulled in so many different directions. And when it does get pulled in so many different directions, it's the understanding that the one thing we can always come back to as a sense of safety is our breathing. And the deeper this relationship is with our breath, the more comfortable we can be to come back to our breath. Because the challenge is, you meditate once or twice and you feel the benefits, but you never built a relationship. And so when that actual stress comes in, actual stress, not just baby stress, I guess, but when actual stress enters, you forget about the relationship. You forget about how much of a support tool the breath can be in moments of real stress, real tension. And so it starts with those little things, right? When you wake up in the morning, how are you breathing? When you're moving through your day, how are you breathing? And these don't have to be deep introspective insights. Pause. Whether you're at a red light, whether you're at standing in line, or whether you just slow down enough to feel. And in doing so, that should help you enough to reclaim some agency, some space to breathe mindfully. And the hope would be is that if you can maintain that sense of mindfulness with mindful breath being at its foundation, that whenever you decide to sit to meditate, that transition from one activity into your meditation becomes a bit more seamless. Or your transition out of a meditation practice is also seamless. That you don't just go from creating that space to then losing all of that space because you've been taken away by the stress of your daily life. Do these things make sense? Any questions? Any disagreements?
We're very agreeable.
Well, play devil's advocate. I don't mind. Yeah, I think that relationship around our breath matters a lot because it's the main thing we work with when we sit to meditate. And it's one thing to do it when we're here sitting, but if we're only aware of our breath when we sit to meditate, we're losing sight of it potentially for the other 99% of our life that we're not sitting and breathing to meditate. So the hope with a practice or with today's lecture, from my point of view, is that this art of breathing isn't about being hyper aware of your breath at all points of your life. But it's about building a relationship to your breath so that you know how your breath reacts to situations that you encounter in daily life. Just as you get stressed out, and you is a combination of a lot of things. At the bare minimum, I am my body, I am my mind, and I am my breath. And all three of these things naturally react to stress Similar ways, different ways, but there's some way that we relate to stress physically, mentally, emotionally, and then internally with breathing. And over time, if we can build a relationship with the breath that is steady, then the mind itself can hopefully remain steady as well when it starts to get stressed. That it doesn't lose its balance immediately, which happens. The smallest trigger for the average person that is unconscious of these things sets them off. Or rather, even if the smallest thing happens, it bubbles, 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 and stays within a person for an extended period of time. But if we can remain steady with our breath, if we can notice how we react with breathing to situations of stress, that realization can help us come back to our mind being in our body, not having the mind get taken away by an experience of anger, of stress, physical, mental, or emotional stress, but that we can notice it, we can acknowledge it, but we don't let it take us off our edge, that we don't let it hinder our sense of steadiness. A steady mind is a very powerful mind because a steady mind is a concentrated mind. And it's not a concentrated mind on anything other than what is happening right in front of us. And the simplest thing that is always happening right in front of us is our breath. So if we can be aware of how we breathe, and if we can develop a breath that is slow, deep, rhythmic, that these things naturally influence how the body acts, how the mind thinks. It's a very unique relationship of mind, body, breath. And it's just something that, once again, we don't have to be judgmental towards ourselves about because most people don't have any formal knowledge about this. We know our math, we know our basic science, we know 1 + 1 = 2, but we don't realize how inhales and exhales can influence a mind state, our emotional state, our physical well-being. So how about this? Last 3 minutes, come back to your breath. Less meditation, more mindful breathing. Your choice is there. If you want to rest a hand on your belly, you can. Close your eyes if you'd like. But just give yourself a few minutes to feel the difference with your breath after what we've talked about. To create the difference if you'd like. So it may require for some of us to relax some of the tension that the body holds around the abdomen. For others, it may require the mind bringing its sense of awareness down towards the belly. For others, it's about tuning the breath to take up a bit more space. I sometimes like to use the visual of my mind, the observer, being a surfer. Inhales and exhales are waves. But the surfer has to be in tune with the waves to ride them. If I turn away from the waves, I fall off my surfboard, which means my mind gets taken away from the path of my breath. But feel that natural rise and fall, expansion and contraction. And see if you can feel the mind being able to enjoy the waves of your breath. If you can feel your body relax itself with the breath. We'll just take a deep breath in through the nose. Soft breath out through the mouth. Open your eyes once again. Did that feel any different? I think what just a simple exercise like that can show us is that if we have awareness of our body, of our mind, of our breath, then it's not necessarily that we need more time to meditate. Because if we can live mindfully, then we are observing all that is happening in front of us. And it just starts with what's happening inside of us. Breath influencing your state of mind, breath influencing the state of your body. And in doing so, you're creating an internal environment that isn't at constant odds with the environment around you. That we're not constantly reacting. So, like I said, sitting in your car, driving in traffic, no doubt we want to be aware of things around us. But we also just need to be grounded inside of us. When we're moving around, say, slower form of transportation, walking, safer in that sense. You're aware of your environment, but you're once again in tune with your inner environment. And in that sense, you're constantly feeling safe within this space. And the safer you can feel in this space, the more confident you can be in your ability to be mindful, grounded. So that when something comes up, you don't immediately get pulled away, swept away. But that you can observe things from a mindful space. Mindful space, not necessarily distance related, but it's your ability to not let things intrude upon your personal space. That's kind of all I got to say today. I hope that made some semblance of sense. I wanted to focus more on the act of breathing, the art of breathing for today, and to just help you understand that as much as we focus on breath when we sit with our eyes closed, that is still the same breath that is with us with our eyes open and we're moving around. But we just may not be as aware of how much that breath changes when we're moving through daily life. And what are some of the things that we can do to bring a little bit more awareness to breath so that we can create that space within us so that life can be a bit more mindful in and of itself. Cool. Awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.